Well, welcome back to Whole Bible Study with me, Ted Inoue, your host. And today's study is going to feel a little different. Instead of opening a chapter of the Bible and reading it together, we're stepping into a story that circles around the scriptures without ever entering their pages. It is the story that grew in folklore, in mystical writings, a cultural imagination, and yet has fascinated people for centuries. It is the story of Lilith, a name some have heard in as Adam's first wife, others as a winged demon, still others as a symbol of rebellion. But when you turn to Genesis, she isn't there. So why spend time here? Because stories like Lilith show us how traditions grow up around the Bible, trying to fill in its silences, the gaps, if you will. They reveal the anxieties, fears, and passions of the people who told them. And even though these stories are not historically accurate necessarily in the way that scripture might be, they remain important. They also act like windows, showing us how ancient communities thought about life, death, anger, sexuality, and power. In other words, stories like Lilith tell us as much about us as humans as they do about the past. They are cultural mirrors. By studying them, we sharpen our ability to see the differences between God's revealed word and the folklore of people. But we also learn to listen to what those old stories say about human hopes and human fears. So today I'll walk you through the traditions of Lilith, narrating them as if we were reading them together. We'll begin with her earliest echoes in Mesopotamia, move into Jewish folklore where she was cast as Adam's first wife, and look at how translators and rabbis wrestled with a single word in Isaiah, explore how mystics reimagine her, and finally ask how the Bible itself left her out. Along the way, we'll see what these stories reveal, not about history, but about humanity. Our first stop is the world of Sumer and Babylon. Many centuries before the book of Genesis was written, in cuneiform texts scratched into clay, we meet spirits called Lilitu. They were female night beings. They had wings, they slipped in through windows, they prowled in the darkness. One ancient incarnation pleads, quote, she who flies in the night, who seizes the children from the arms of its mother, depart, unquote. Another name's a figure called Lamashitsu, a terrifying demoness who strangles children and drinks their blood. Terrifying words, but behind them were very real fears. Mothers and infants died in childbirth with heartbreaking frequency. Sudden infant deaths seemed to strike without warning in the face of such helpless people. In the face of such helplessness, people gave those tragedies a face and a name. Now, archaeologists have found amulets buried beneath thresholds hung over cradles inscribed with protective prayers and pictures of Lamashitsa bound in chains. Others have found incarnation bowls, shallow clay vessels inscribed with spiraling texts, buried upside down to trap demons. The people of the ancient Near East lived with constant vulnerability, and their stories, their myths, their demons reflect that vulnerability. They tell us what mattered most to them: protecting life, guarding mothers, preserving children. When Judah was taken into exile in Babylon, the Jewish people lived in the midst of this culture. They saw the amulets, they heard the incarnations, they learned the language, and in their own scriptures, a word appears that seems to echo it. In Isaiah 34, the prophet describes the judgment of God on the land of Edom, leaving it desolate and haunted by wild creatures. The verse says, quote, wild animals shall meet with hyenas. The goat demon shall call its kind. There too the lilit shall rest and find a place of repose, unquote. What does lilit mean? translators have wrestled with it for centuries. The King James Version famously rendered it, quote, screech owl. The Vulgate called it a, quote, lamia, borrowing a monster from Greco-Roman lore. Now, the Greek Septuagint sidestepped the question by calling it a, quote, creature of the night, unquote. The Aramaic Targum translated it more boldly as, quote, demon night, or night demon, unquote. And even among the Jewish interpreters, the debates varied. Some rabbis insisted it was simply an owl-like bird. Others said it was a spirit of the wastelands, and still others pointed directly to the old Mesopotamian night demon. The Dead Sea Scrolls even preserve Isaiah 34 with the same word intact, showing that in the Second Temple period, the mystery of Lilit was alive. So from one rare word, imagination began to build. The wasteland of Edom became a stage where not only wild beasts roamed, but also spirits of chaos. Centuries later, in the medieval text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith stepped fully into the spotlight. The text is not scripture. It is not even apocrypha. It is folklore. Sometimes satirical, sometimes bawdly, sometimes mystical, but it gave us the story most people think of when we hear her name. And since we cannot read it aloud together, let me tell it to you as a story. When God formed Adam from the dust of the ground, he also formed a woman created not from his rib, but from the same soil. Her name was Lilith. For a time, they lived together in Eden. But soon they quarreled. Adam said, quote, lie beneath me, unquote. Lilith replied, why should I lie beneath you? We are equals. We were both made from the earth. And Adam said, it is my right, for I am the man. Lilith answered, it is not your right. I will not submit, unquote. The quarrel grew heated. Imagine the scene. Adam, indignant, appealing to his authority. Lilith, fiery, insisting on her equality. Their words echoed across the garden. Neither yielded. Finally, Lilith cried out the ineffable name of God, a name too holy for human lips. And with it, she gained the power of flight. She rose into the air, leaving Eden behind. Adam, bewildered and angry, turned to God. Quote, the woman you gave me has fled, unquote. God sent three angels, Inoue, Inoue, and Semenagoloth, to bring her back. They found her by the Red Sea. In the tale, she had already joined herself to demons, giving birth to hundreds of their children each day. The angels said, quote, return to Adam, or we will slay your children, unquote. Lilith replied, do what you must, but know this, if you kill my children, I will seek the children of Adam. Wherever infants are born, I will come, unquote. The angels threatened her again, but finally a compromise was struck. Each day, 100 of Lilith's children would die. In return, Lilith would indeed have power to harm human infants. But she would be powerless whether she saw an amulet inscribed with the angel's name. And so the story ends with Lilith wandering the night, feared by mothers, kept at bay by charms. Now, why did this story form? One reason lies in the opening chapters of Genesis. Chapter 1 describes man with woman created together in God's image. Chapter 2 describes man created first with woman formed later from his rib. Some interpreters looked at these two accounts and wondered, was the woman of chapter 1 a different figure entirely? Lilith became the answer to that puzzle. But another reason is cultural. In a patriarchal world, a woman who refused male authority was deeply threatening. Lilith became a cautionary tale. The woman who would not submit was not simply disobedient, she was turned into a monster. Her rebellion was equated with death, with the most terrifying danger of all, the loss of children. Here we see myth doing its work, not telling history, but reinforcing boundaries, reflecting the fears of society. The Bible itself, however, does something very different. Eve also sinned. She listened to the serpent. She ate the fruit. She gave it to Adam, but Eve remains human. She's not demonized. She is called the mother of all the living. She receives both judgment and promise. She will bear pain, but through her comes the seed who will one day crush the serpent. In Scripture, woman is not turned into a creature of the night. She is honored as a part of humanity's story, capable of failure, but also the essential to redemption. The contrast could not be sharper. Lilith belongs to folklore shaped by fear. Eve belongs to revelation shaped by God's truth. Later, the mystics of the Zohar developed Lilith further. They paired her with Samuel, the dark prince of demons. Together they became a shadow image of Adam and Eve, a dark mirror of the human couple. Lilith was pictured with long hair, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying. Her tresses described as snares of lust. She was said to tempt men, to draw them into impurity, to embody desire unbound. In this mystical imagination, Lilith was no longer just a threat to infants, but the very symbol of chaotic passion. Again, myth was doing its work, expressing cultural anxieties about sexuality, lust, and the dangers of losing control. And in the modern times, she was remade yet again. Poets of the 19th century rediscovered her, not as a demon, but as a tragic figure. Feminists of the 20th century reclaim her as the first woman who said no, the one who claimed equality. A Jewish feminist magazine in the 1970s took her name as its title deliberately, inverting the old fear and making her a symbol of autonomy. In this retelling, Lilith was not the destroyer of children, but the first free woman. Each age has shaped her differently. In Mesopotamia, she was a demon of the night, feared for stealing infants. In Isaiah, she was a shadowy creature haunting desolation. In the Alphabet of Ben Sira, she was Adam's rebellious first wife. In the Zohar, she was the queen of lust. In modern thought, she became a heroine of independence. These are not historical facts. They are cultural mirrors. They show us what people feared, what they valued, what they longed for. They're not scripture, but they are powerful testimonies of human imagination. So why is Lilith not in the Bible? The simplest reason is that her story was never part of God's revelation. It arose in folklore, not in truth, but perhaps that is also a deeper reason. The biblical writers resisted demonizing women. They told us a story of Adam and Eve that emphasized shared failure, shared responsibility, and shared hope. They did not need a monstrous first wife to explain human sin. They knew that sin was already close to home, already present in every human heart. And by leaving Lilith outside the canon, the Bible itself shows its restraint. It refuses to let fear rewrite the story of creation. And that is where our journey ends. Today, we have wandered from Babylon's spells to medieval amulets, from Isaiah's rare word to Eve's story, from rabbinic debates to modern reinterpretation. Lilith is not in the scriptures, but she shows us what people feared, what they questioned, and how they filled silence with stories. And by studying her, we can better see the wisdom of Scripture itself, which does not bow to fear, but tells the truth of humanity in all its dignity and all its weakness. Thank you for joining me on this fascinating dive into the history of Lilith. It has been a privilege to explore this unusual tradition with you. And I hope it was, excuse me, it has been a privilege to explore this unusual tradition with you, and I hope it has sharpened your eyes to see how ancient myths, even when not historically accurate, can tell us something real about the concerns and passions of our past and about ourselves as human beings. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next chapter soon.